Producers, here are 10 R&B chord progressions that you need to know if you want to make authentic, soulful chord progressions in your production. So going from 1 to 10, we're going to start out very basic, and as we go along, we're going to get a little bit more advanced. We're going to add a little more spice. We're going to add a little more juice until we get to the land
of the glass perverse.
What's going on, producers and songwriters? If you're new to the channel, welcome. My name is BruceBeats. I'm a multi-instrumentalist and producer, credits spanning from major TV film brands to major artists in the music industry. And my goal with this channel is to help you increase your knowledge, skills, and confidence on the keys, specifically for music production, so you can express yourself the way you want to without all this inapplicable and outdated theory getting in the way. So with that being said, let's get right into it. Now, before we dive deep, I want to mention something that may be shocking to a few of you, especially if you're a beginner or low intermediate. The way that I think of what I'm about to show you in these 10 different chord progressions is actually just one chord progression.
What do you mean? What are you doing? What do you mean? What do you mean? What do you mean?
We can just take this one chord progression and put a bunch of variations on it to get different chord progressions. And they are different chord progressions, but when you think about it as just one and variations on the one, it becomes easier for you to manipulate this chord progression and use it over and over again across different productions, but it never sounds exactly the same. Don't worry, this isn't a bait and switch type of deal where I promise you 10 and I only give you one. More so, I'm presenting what I feel is an ideal frame for you to view this information through so that it's easier for you to use. That being said, if that actually makes it more complicated, throw that out the window and think about it the way you want to. However it works best for your brain is how I want you to think about it. So this chord progression consists of 3 chords, and we're going to think about it in the key of C minor, because I know a lot of you are familiar with this key, and so it's going to make it kind of easy for you to grasp. Here is the chord progression. Like, that sounds really cool. Now here's how we're gonna think about it though, so that we can manipulate it in some really cool ways. You don't wanna just think C, F, and G. You actually wanna think 1, 4, and 5. If we think about this in numbers, if I were to go up every single note of the C minor scale and think of that as a number, and then I would make a chord using the scale with each one of those notes, I would have the 1 chord, the 2 chord, the 3 chord, the 4 chord, the 5 chord, the 6 chord, the 7 chord, and then I'm back to the 1. So in this case, we have the 1 chord, which is C minor. We have the 4 chord, which is F minor. And we have the 5 chord, which is G minor. Now these 3 chords are used so much across so many different genres, but they're used a lot in R&B. And the way we can manipulate these chords is pretty much endless. So I'm giving you 10 ways that we can manipulate this. There's more ways than just 10, but I feel 10 is a good amount for this video, and we'll give you a lot to chew on. So that said, we can use it just like this. I mean, that sounds really cool right there. Second option is to start to change the order of the chords. So if you notice, number 1 started on the 1 chord. Number 2, we can actually start on the 4 chord, and that's gonna give us some cool vibes. Right? That gives us a completely different vibe. So in that spirit, we can change the order yet again. You see how each one of those had a different emotional feel? And we can obviously rearrange them in more than 3 ways, right? But these 3 ways are incredibly common. Simply by taking these same chords and rearranging them, we get a new chord progression because it gives us a different emotional feel, but it's really just the same chords shuffled in a different order. So do you see why I'm starting to think about it as just one chord progression? We just kind of play with it a little bit. Now, before we start adding all the smooth stuff to make it extra juicy, let's talk about a couple more ways that we can manipulate just this one thing while keeping it relatively simple. Number 4 is just to go back and forth between 4 and 5, and we can actually do something really cool here to keep this interesting over time. So check this out. And then finally we can bring it home. So going back and forth between that 4 and 5, this I find really useful for like free hooks and parts in the track where you want to build this energy and build this anticipation so that you can arrive somewhere, because going back and forth between those 2 chords, it just has this like looping effect, because we're not playing the 1 chord. We're just kind of going back and forth between these two chords, and it has this feeling of bringing you somewhere. But one of the things that we could do to make this very interesting is we can add that little guy right in between. So if we notice what's happening here is we're going from G minor to F minor. So this is a minor chord to another minor chord, and they're a whole step apart. So what I can do is I can pass from one to the other chromatically. And that gives me some really nice vibes. So imagine if I took this now and I put it inside one of the 3 chord versions of this progression. I'm gonna give you a little bonus here, progression 4A. So let's say we arrange the chords as C, G minor, F minor. But let's say as we're going along this, we wanna just throw in that little passing chord in one of these moments. That's my 808, right? You see how that one thing kept the chord progression interesting? So that's something really cool that we can do in between the 4 and 5 every single time we're in minor, no matter what key you're in. Chord progression number 5. Now is when things start to get a little bit more spicy, a little bit more juicy. So do you notice the difference in this chord progression? It's that one chord. So that one chord, instead of playing it as minor, we're gonna play it as major. We're gonna get a little nice lift. Get a chord progression of PBL. We want to use this one chord as a major chord to create moments in our track. So it's really cool to use like towards the end as the cycle has looped a few times. Then you throw in that one major chord to give it a surprise. So to demonstrate this, if I'm using this in the context of what I said before, here's what we have. Then we go back. So you see how like this gives us a nice lift? Like the sunshine just broke through the clouds, and then we go back down to that minor vibe. So that's what's really cool about this one chord. You can use it for those moments to give your track a little bit of interest and excitement as it moves forward. Number 6. Now we are starting to enter the land of tension and release. Excellent. Here's where things start getting really exciting, because everything we've had up to this point, like all of these chords here, they're very smooth sounding, right? Even when we throw in that passing chord here, like everything's smooth. And even though it sounds really nice, there's nothing, even, you know, when we add this guy, there's nothing like jarring. There's nothing really grabbing you. So once we start using what we introduce here is when we start getting some of that. Is when we start getting those stank face chords that really brings the chord progressions to the next level. And this right here is the first step. So if you notice here, we actually kept it in the same order as chord progression number 1. The only difference is we're taking this 5 chord, and instead of playing it as a minor, we're gonna play it as a dominant chord. Now the only difference between these 2 chords is just one note, but this one note is incredibly powerful. So if I were to play G minor, here's what I have, and here's what I've been playing. But when I play G dominant, instead of playing the B flat, I'm simply gonna play the B. And when I do that, listen to the difference in the sound. There's such a stronger pull when I do those back and forth. That sounds cool, but then we get... You see how that had a stronger pull? That G7 had a much stronger pull into that C minor? And that's because of this note. This note really wants to go here. It really wants to resolve there. And so that pull, this B going into this C, is really what makes that chord that chord. It gives it that extra tension. So we can use that in our chord progressions. Right? And that would sound really cool. Like sitting on that dominant chord just sounds really nice. And by the way, you can swap between using the 5 chord as a minor chord and using the 5 chord as a dominant chord in the same song. So we can have a chord progression that actually sounds something like this. You see how the first time here I had the minor 5, and the second time I had the dominant 5, and then the first time here I had the minor 1, and the second time I had the major 1. So I can simply swap between these. But do you see how it's just 4, 5, 1? That's why I like to think about this as one chord progression and just variations on the one idea. Is that starting to make sense now? Now, here's what's really fun about this dominant chord. Because it just has that inherent tension, what we can do is we can dress it up with different colors that make it even more tense so that we can get different colors into our resolution. So that's what we're gonna take a look at with number 7, 8, 9, and 10. Chord progression numero 7. Oops. The 5 looks a little bit different this time, right? Instead of it being just a 5, 7, instead of just a regular dominant 7 chord, we now have this funky chord symbol there. What does that say? Flat 9? Don't let the extra little scribbles on the page confuse you. This is actually very, very simple. So the difference between just a regular dominant chord and then a dominant chord with a flat 9 on it is we can hear that added note. And so what we're doing is we're adding more tension that brings us into our resolution. So much like we took a look at here, where it's like that note brings us home, we're adding another note that has that tension as well, and that happens to be the flat 9. So we have this A flat coming down to this G, and that gives us that tension. So when we have those two notes at the same time, and to give us, you see how when I just played those two notes by themselves, you can hear the whole chord moving. That's the power of these tension notes. So the whole chord progression context, we have, hear that? You hear how that chord had a little bit more tension to it? Let's check it out one more time. It gave a little bit more tension. There was a little bit more rub and spice to that chord because of the flat 9. Now, I'm not gonna spend the rest of this video talking about counting up to the 9 and then flatting it and then finding what the dominant 7 is, because honestly, that's a way to do it, but it's not the best way to do it. The best way to actually get these shapes down is using what I like to call the grip system. The grip system is actually a cheat code to play advanced harmony, to start getting these like next level tension sounds into your playing without the theory of like the flat 9 and the sharp 9 and the flat 13 and the sharp 5 getting in the way if you're not necessarily that theory savvy. And if you are theory savvy already, this is gonna take you and skyrocket you.
Of the glass perverse.
I have a free grips mini course for you. Go ahead and click the link in the description below. Join the Piano for Producers squad and you can start going through the grips mini course today, absolutely for free. Let's move on to our next tension chord. This one right here is one of my favorite and a lot of my students' favorite as well. Here's how it sounds. Sounds really beautiful, right? Now, one of the things I really like to do with the alto chord, which I've already done here, is I actually like to bring it into major. Because it's so striking, it's very dark, this chord. When we bring it down to minor, it works really well. However, when we've already established this dark 5, and then we just hit them with that major 1 like we spoke about before, we get some really nice sounds. And as a matter of fact, that's actually chord progression number 9, is actually just taking the same altered chord and bringing it down into major, because we just get a really cool vibe. So are you starting to see how many different ways we can play the 4-5-1? I've literally played nothing but 4-5-1 this entire video, just with minor tweaks over time. And last but not least, one of my favorite chords to use, the sus chord. So everything we've done so far to this dominant chord has made it crunchier and has made it a little darker. But we can also make this chord lighter and brighter and lessen the tension to bring us back home. That's what the sus chord allows us to do. So how do I get the sus chord? It's another 1 note change. So let's play our dominant chord here. And remember this third note? This is the one that made the dominant chord, right? If I don't play the 3 and I actually move this up 1 half step and I play the 4 instead, you know, I keep the 7 on there, we can see chordy switched. And this has just an inherent, it like hangs, right? You've heard that sound before. And that's what that sound is. It's the sus, going down to the dominant, going back to the 1. Now, you can do that. That's really cool. But one of the ways that we can actually exploit the sus chord, and one of the ways that a lot of people have been doing it since the Earth, Wind, and Fire days, is just to play that sus chord and leave it sus and never resolve that sus. And so it creates this beautiful color. So I love using this chord as a surprise in the middle of the chord progression. So if I were to rearrange these chords just a little bit, which you can absolutely come up with a song with just a 4-5-1, but if I want to be a little bit more creative and use the 4-5-1 in a couple different ways to introduce the sus chord, I might do something like this. You see how in the second half of the chord progression, you were kind of expecting the same thing to happen again, especially because we started with the same 2 chords. But then all of a sudden, we hit you with a 5 sus and a 1 major. But we're still playing 5-1. Do you see that? Like when we look at the chord progression, we're still playing 1-4-5-1, 1-4-5-1. All we did was change this 5 to a sus and this 1 to a major. And that's why this has been one chord progression with 10 variations. If this video has been helpful to you, hit that like and subscribe button. If you want to know more about the grip system, join my free group below. And if you want to work with me personally, more information on the Piano for Producers Academy is in the description below as well. My name is Bruce Beats. I'll see you on the next one.